Would you believe that just $5 in return can change your destiny? That's the funny thing about kindness. It never asks for a return policy, but sometimes it cashes out with interest you never imagined. That morning, Maya Johnson thought she was just paying for a cup of coffee. Instead, she was buying a one-way ticket into a storm that would blow the dust off generations of buried truth. She didn't know it yet. All she knew was that something ugly was unfolding at the counter, and her apron didn't come with a mute button for her conscience. What happened next was not only a lesson for the aggressors, but also a powerful reminder of empathy, responsibility, and the ongoing fight for equal dignity. We're about to share a powerful moment of truth. But first, drop your location and let us know, have you ever witnessed or experienced something like this? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. It started like too many things do, with a power trip and a polyester name tag. "Look, another beggar trying to pass himself off as a customer," Manager Christopher snapped, loud enough for the room to catch every syllable like spit in church. "I've told you before, this isn't a shelter. No money, no service." The coffee shop went quiet in that special kind of way. A room full of people pretending they weren't hearing what they were hearing. The old man at the center of it all wasn't saying much, just standing there, in a coat that had seen too many winters, patting his pockets like they owed him a favor. "I swear I brought my wallet," he said, voice shaking like the paper cup he hadn't been given yet. "I just wanted something hot before heading home." "And I just want paying customers," Christopher snapped, gesturing at the door like it had teeth. "We have a strict no tramps policy. You're scaring away real customers." The man flinched, not at the words, but at the words real. The kind that slices without drawing blood. A laugh slipped out from a corner booth, the kind of laugh you hear in country clubs and silent elevators. Privileged, pointed, polite enough to sting. "These old people think they're entitled to everything," one of the suit-wearing peanut gallery muttered. Maya, wiping down a table nearby, froze mid-swipe. She had only been at this job 6 months, long enough to know that invisibility was part of the uniform. Speak up and risk becoming the next item on Christopher's chopping block. But something about this situation stirred a painful memory she had tried to bury, of when her grandmother, confused by dementia, was treated like an intruder in a department store. Maya had stood there then too, paralyzed, swallowing her voice like broken glass. Not this time. She straightened, pulled out the little wad of cash from her apron pocket, the day's tips, exactly $10.00, and walked to the register like she owned the floor. "I'll pay for his coffee," she said, placing a crumpled 5 on the counter. Her hand didn't shake. Her voice did. "No one should be treated like that over a cup of coffee." Christopher's nostrils flared. "Maya, stay out of this. This isn't your problem." She locked eyes with him. "It is now. It's a matter of human decency, and if anyone should be ashamed here, it shouldn't be him." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was electric. The kind that dares anyone to speak, but makes them check their soul first. Christopher grabbed the bill like it offended him. "Your coffee is served, sir," he said coldly, "courtesy of our employee who apparently thinks she can make management decisions now." He handed the cup to the old man with theatrical disdain, as if he were giving out charity at gunpoint. The old man didn't say much, just looked at Maya, eyes glassy but focused. "Thank you," he whispered, the words landing with more weight than they should have. Not just gratitude, something else, something deeper, like he'd been waiting for this. Not the coffee, but the kindness. Maya led him to a seat near the window, the one with the view of the parking lot and just enough sunlight to make a person feel human again. He held the cup like it had been earned, not handed out. She smiled and said, "My grandmother used to say that kindness isn't something you expect, it's something you practice." He nodded once, slow and heavy, like a man closing a door only he could see. As Maya turned back toward the counter, she felt it. That invisible shift, like something just snapped into place that had been hanging crooked for years. What she didn't know was that $5 had just purchased a seat at a table she didn't even know existed. And she'd already tipped the first domino. The next morning, before Maya could even clock in, she was summoned. No greeting, no smile. Just Christopher waiting in the office with a manila folder, his arms crossed like someone about to announce judgment from Mount Olympus. The fake concern on his face was stretched thinner than the patience of anyone who'd ever worked under him. "Maya," he began, voice dipped in that flavorless syrup managers use when they're about to swing the hammer. "You do understand that this is a business, not a charity." She said nothing, just watched him pace like a rooster in a rented suit. "What you did yesterday was not only inappropriate, it was insubordinate. You embarrassed your team, you embarrassed the brand, you undermined my authority in front of paying customers." He slid a paper across the desk like it was the 10 Commandments. "This isn't about the money. It's about authority." Maya blinked. "I paid with my own tips," she replied quietly. But that didn't matter. That never mattered. "This isn't about the money," he snapped again, louder this time, as if repetition could transform hypocrisy into policy. "It's about authority, and you made me and this staff look insensitive so you could feel like a hero." The form stared back at her with the kind of coldness only corporate language can conjure. Words like probation, incident. She picked up the pen, hands a little less steady than yesterday. She didn't argue, there wasn't room to. She signed it with the same care she used when writing rent checks. Knowing this, too, could cost her a roof. But something felt off. Christopher wasn't celebrating his power trip the way he usually did. He kept looking up at the security camera in the corner of the office like it might blink back. He rubbed his hands together too much, eyes darting from the form to the lens to Maya and back again. He was nervous, but not because of her. It was the kind of nervous that comes from knowing there's a second camera you didn't install, or a second opinion that actually matters. She filed that look away. The tension wasn't just hers anymore. It was leaking from the walls. When her shift ended, Maya changed out of her apron and opened her locker. That's when she found it. A small white envelope, no name, no logo, just tucked beneath her sweater like a whisper waiting to be heard. She looked around, no one in sight. Her fingers broke the seal with caution, like it might bite. Inside, a crisp $100, 0 cents bill, and a small folded card. On it, 5 handwritten words in tidy, purposeful script. "Thank you for your kindness. The world needs more people like you." No signature, no clue. She stared at the bill like it had a voice. It wasn't a tip, it wasn't pity, it wasn't some secret Santa stunt. It was a statement, a move in a game she didn't know she was playing. And that card? That wasn't paper. That was strategy. A chess piece sliding across a board she couldn't see yet, nudging her forward. $100 might not be a fortune to most, but to Maya it was groceries, bus fare, a power bill. And all of it wrapped in mystery. Her breath caught in her chest, not from fear this time, but from possibility. That night, she boiled rice in a dented pot while her mother rested on the couch, wrapped in layers of blankets and soft jazz. The apartment was small, but it held them both like an old friend who never asked questions. Maya set 2 plates on the table, just like always, but her eyes kept drifting back to the envelope propped near the salt shaker. She couldn't explain it, but it didn't feel like charity. It felt like an answer to a question she hadn't asked out loud. Her mother looked over, eyes clouded but loving. "What's that?" she asked softly. Maya just smiled, shaking her head. "Maybe," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "maybe it's proof." Her mom tilted her head. "Proof of what?" Maya stirred the rice gently, watching the steam rise. That doing the right thing doesn't always echo in silence. And as they ate quietly in the glow of a flickering bulb, Maya didn't feel like a waitress on probation. She felt like someone who had just been handed the second page of a story she thought had already ended. The next morning started off like any other. Burnt coffee smell in the break room, Christopher barking about smudged glass, and Maya tying her apron with muscle memory instead of motivation. But the rhythm of the day snapped the moment the front door chimed and a man in an immaculate navy suit stepped inside. He didn't shout for attention, He didn't need to. He carried it with him like gravity. His walk was smooth, his posture straight, his eyes sharp. Maya wasn't looking at his shoes or his blazer, though. She was looking at his eyes. Those familiar, thoughtful, quietly amused eyes. And suddenly, the man who'd been humiliated for a coffee looked like he owned the building. Because he probably did. Christopher practically flew to the counter, pasting on a smile so artificial it could have been rented. "Welcome, sir. May I recommend our special imported roast? It's not on the menu. We reserve it for our more select customers." The man gave a polite nod, barely glancing at the display case. "Thank you, but I'm not here for the coffee. I'd like to be served by the young woman who helped an elderly gentleman a few days ago." That smile on Christopher's face broke like a bad stock. I'm not sure who you mean, sir." But the man's gaze was fixed. Calm. Unrelenting. "I insist." Christopher turned to Maya, now visibly sweating. "This gentleman's asking for you." His voice had dropped its usual bite. Maya stepped forward slowly, heart tapping, a warning she didn't understand. The man extended his hand. "Pleased to meet you again. Formally this time. I'm Edward Thornton." And just like that, the world tilted. Maya had heard that name before. It rang through news segments like a bell in a cathedral. Thornton, the billionaire philanthropist who built his empire not just by acquiring businesses but by investing in people. The same man who just days ago had been shoved out like yesterday's trash. Now, he stood in front of her, perfectly composed, perfectly powerful. He pulled a gold card from his pocket and handed it to her with quiet ceremony. "I'd like to invite you for a conversation," he said. "Not a job interview, something more meaningful." The card was smooth, embossed, and had his name engraved with nothing else but a phone number. No titles, no slogans, just intention. Maya took it without speaking, too aware of Christopher's hawk-like eyes, too uncertain what the right response even was. Thank you," she stammered, then steadied herself. "When?" Edward smiled. "Tomorrow, noon. Alexander Hotel." With that, he left. No coffee purchased, no glances back, just the quiet command of someone who didn't need to announce his arrival or his exit. Maya didn't wait until her shift ended. The moment she got home and changed into sweatpants, she flipped open her old laptop like it was a vault and started typing his name. It didn't take long. Articles, awards, interviews. But it wasn't the headlines about wealth that caught her eye. It was the stories behind them. Edward Thornton, founder of the Thornton Foundation, known for funding unknown talent and exposing injustice in industries most people ignored. He was called eccentric by some, brilliant by others. But there was one thing they all agreed on. He had a habit of showing up where no one expected him, dressed down, unassuming, watching, listening. They called it the Thornton test, a method where he disguised himself as a vulnerable person to assess the culture of a workplace before investing in it. Sometimes it led to donations, other times to exposés. Always it led to transformation. Maya sat back in her chair, stunned. The man she'd defended wasn't just anybody. He was the one person who could do something about the rot she'd watched fester for months behind the coffee counter. But what was he looking for, really? What was this invitation about? She looked at the gold card again, the edges warm now from her fingers. And for the first time in days, she wasn't afraid of what was next. She was curious. And curiosity, in the hands of someone with something to lose and everything to gain, is a dangerous, beautiful thing. The following morning, as Maya was tying her apron and preparing for another shift of faking calm under fluorescent lights, a knock at her apartment door interrupted the ritual. She opened it to find a hotel courier standing there, holding a simple cream envelope sealed with wax. Her name was written in calligraphy across the front. Inside was a formal lunch invitation to the Alexander Hotel. Same place Edward had mentioned, but that wasn't what stopped her breath. Folded beneath the invite were several black and white photographs, aged and frayed at the corners, but clear enough to see a truth she wasn't ready for. One photo showed a storefront sign, Johnson Coffee Shop, Est, 1932. In front of it stood a tall black man in suspenders and a fedora, surrounded by a proud family. Her family. Her last name, her roots, printed right there on glass and paper like a whisper from the past, yelling to be heard. She sat down, heart hammering, staring at the images. Her eyes moved from face to face, from storefront to sidewalk, trying to confirm the impossible. This cafe, this very location, had once belonged to her blood. Before it was Reed Coffee House, before Christopher barked orders behind the counter, before she had to beg to be seen, it had been theirs. Later that day, during a lull in the shift, Maya returned to the locker room to grab her phone charger. Tucked between two staff schedules taped to her locker door, she found a flash drive, no label, no note, just there, waiting. She slipped it into her pocket and waited until she was home that night to plug it in. The screen flickered and then opened to 3 files. The first was a scan of a property deed dated 1932. Her great-grandfather, Thomas Johnson, listed as the original owner. The second file was a hospital intake form from the same year, confirming he had been admitted for pneumonia. The third file, that's where the punch landed. A second deed with a forged signature transferring the cafe to Harold Reed during the weeks her great-grandfather was hospitalized. Not sold, not gifted, stolen, and never returned. Maya stared at the screen, hands trembling but steadying by the second. She wasn't just a worker in that building. She wasn't just another face behind the register. That cafe had her family's fingerprints on its foundation, and someone had gone to great lengths to scrub them off. This wasn't just fraud, it was generational theft, wrapped in paperwork and dust. They hadn't just taken property, they'd stolen identity, erased a name, swapped legacies like tags on a suitcase. Rhetorical thoughts twisted in her head. How do you return something that was never supposed to be taken? How many coffee orders had she filled, standing on top of a lie she didn't know she inherited? She thought of her mother, sick and struggling, of her grandmother's memories slipping away one day at a time, and all the while, their family history had been trapped in the hands of people who didn't just steal, they repackaged what wasn't theirs and sold it as tradition. They didn't just take a building, she whispered, fingers clenched. They erased a lineage. The more she stared at the screen, the more a fire lit behind her ribs, not rage. This was colder. This was clarity. A still, sharp knowing that comes when silence has lasted too long. She wasn't just on probation anymore. She was on the edge of something she couldn't unsee. By midnight, Maya stood by her kitchen window, the city humming softly outside. Card from Edward on the table, flash drive beside it. She whispered to herself, not with fear, but with intention, when justice takes a century, its arrival must be perfect. There would be no yelling, no viral videos, just truth, surgical, undeniable, and overdue. Maya Johnson was done surviving. She was about to reclaim what should have never been taken in the first place, and this time, she wouldn't be the one getting served, she'd be serving notice. 3 hours after Maya whispered her promise to the night, she walked back into the coffee shop, not as an employee, but as something else entirely. Thornton arrived first, flanked by 2 lawyers in charcoal suits and a camera crew that rolled in without apology. The regulars looked up from their half-finished lattes, confused by the sudden shift in atmosphere. The tension in the room was dense, not loud, but thick enough to taste, like the moment a jury files back into a courtroom with a verdict in hand. Christopher emerged from the back office with a stiff smile that cracked the moment he saw Thornton standing next to Maya, calm and composed, her name tag left behind on purpose. The customers sensed something electric in the air, and they were right. Truth was about to take the floor, and it wasn't asking for permission. Maya stepped up to the counter she used to clean, placed a tablet on the surface and tapped the screen. The lights dimmed slightly as the wall behind them flickered to life with projected images. Her great-grandfather, the original Johnson Coffee Shop, dated deeds, fraudulent transfers, and then, finally, a smoking gun. An email from Christopher to the corporate office sent 2 years earlier. Found something in old files, possible legal issue W/Johnson name. Recommend destroy and deny knowledge if approached. The room inhaled like one body. Murmurs spread through the cafe, hushed but jagged. The truth didn't knock. It detonated. Maya didn't yell. She didn't point fingers. She simply spoke with the precision of someone who had spent days preparing for this moment, but decades being prepared by her history. This establishment was not always called Reed Coffee House, she said, her voice steady. It was Johnson Coffee Shop, built by Thomas Johnson, my great-grandfather. During a hospital stay in 1932, the deed was illegally transferred to the Reed family. This place was never sold, it was taken. And for nearly a century our name was scrubbed from the windows, the records, the memory. Then she tapped to reveal one more slide. The email. The audience didn't need explanation. The words were clear, damning, permanent. Destroy and deny isn't the language of mistake. It's the blueprint of a cover-up. One by one, customers turned toward Christopher, whose face had lost all its practiced arrogance. A few stood. Zoe, now behind the counter, had her mouth open in disbelief. The cafe had never been so silent, and yet never so loud. Using the glass doors opened again, and in stepped the CEO of Reed Hospitality Group, flanked by assistants and flustered PR staff. His expression was unreadable, until he caught sight of the email projected on the wall. His face hardened. Mr. Reed, he said, addressing both Richard and Christopher, who had crept into the shadows near the register. Effective immediately, you are both relieved of your positions. The silence popped like a bubble. This is not just a business correction. This is a matter of historical justice, and we are committed to correcting it, publicly, permanently. The cameras captured every second, no rehearsals, no edits. Christopher looked like a man halfway between a confession and a collapse. Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The crowd watched, not with cruelty, but with the quiet righteousness that comes when the scales finally tip the right way. And in the middle of it all stood Maya, not victorious in the way revenge tastes, but in the way truth settles, deep, final, restorative. She didn't gloat. She didn't even smirk. She stood with the same calm that once paid for a stranger's coffee and changed the course of everything. Thornton stepped beside her, nodded once, and said quietly, "Legacy restored, loud and legal." And Maya, who had once been invisible behind a counter, now stood at the center of a reckoning decades overdue. She didn't just take back what was hers. She forced everyone to see what they had chosen to forget. The ribbon wasn't fancy, just a deep red strip pulled across the newly painted doorway of the cafe that now bore its rightful name again, Johnson Family Coffee House. But to Maya, it was heavier than velvet, soaked in history, sweat, and silence that had lasted nearly a century. She stood between Zoe and her mother, who was bundled in a warm shawl and seated in a wheelchair beside her. The crowd gathered outside, stretched around the block. Neighbors, local reporters, young kids on bikes, elders holding folded newspapers, some in tears, some just wide-eyed. Maya took the ceremonial scissors in her hand, glanced at her mom, who squeezed her fingers gently, and cut the ribbon with a steady hand and a small, solemn smile. The moment the fabric fell, the crowd erupted. Not in roaring applause, but something richer. Claps, yes, but also cheers that came with relief. They weren't just celebrating a new business, they were witnessing a chapter rewritten. Inside, the smell of fresh paint mingled with the rich aroma of responsibly sourced coffee beans. But this wasn't just about coffee anymore. Maya had worked with Thornton and his legal team to ensure that the space wasn't just restored, but reimagined. The cafe would now operate with a dual mission: serve great coffee and serve the community. A portion of the profits would go to a hospitality training program Maya launched for marginalized youth, offering barista certifications, management internships, and entrepreneurship workshops. Teens who were once treated like problems would now be trained as professionals. "Every cup here will be brewed with dignity," Maya had said during the planning meetings. It became their new slogan, printed not just on napkins but on every contract and staff badge. They weren't just rebuilding a business, they were growing a legacy. Across town, in a small corner cafe that boasted more budget donuts than decor, Christopher Reed sat alone with a paper cup clutched between his hands. No custom roasts, no imported beans, just the cheapest coffee on the menu and a seat by the window that no one offered. He had to ask. His phone sat face down on the chipped table, silent for days now. Corporate had cut all ties. Job listings went unanswered. His name, once enough to open doors, now came with a digital stink no resume could bleach. The waitress, young, cheerful, wearing chipped pink polish, set down the cup with a warm smile. "This one's on the house," she said gently, noticing the slump in his shoulders. Christopher looked up, startled. "You don't have to do that," he mumbled. She shrugged. Kindness doesn't wait for a balance sheet. He stared at the steam rising from the cup, suddenly realizing he was being offered the very thing he'd spent years denying others. The irony wasn't lost on him. The bitterness wasn't just in the brew. It was in the taste of justice he never saw coming. Back at Johnson Family Coffee House, Maya stood near the back, watching the first wave of customers take their seats. The hum of conversation floated through the air like music. Kids laughed over cocoa. A grandfather read quietly in the corner with a grandchild curled beside him. The espresso machine hissed like it had always belonged there, and maybe it had. Maya watched Zoe greet a customer at the counter, confident, poised, exactly as Maya had imagined she'd become. This was no longer just a coffee shop. It was a place where truth had put down roots. She leaned against the reclaimed wood beam near the window, thinking not of revenge, but of resilience. The wall beside her now bore a plaque with her great-grandfather's name, and under it a simple phrase, "Built on truth, restored by courage." She didn't need applause or headlines. She had this moment, the sound of laughter where there used to be silence, the taste of equity in every sip. She thought of that first $5 bill, placed on the counter with trembling hands, a simple act of decency. And now, a full house, a team with purpose, and a story that couldn't be erased. The seed of kindness, Maya thought, grew into a tree of justice. And under that tree, everyone could finally breathe. 3 months after the ribbon was cut and the last stain of injustice scrubbed from the walls, Maya Johnson sat across from a journalist in a sunlit corner of the very cafe her ancestors had built. The article was for Business Ethics magazine, a full-profile spread titled "The Waitress Who Reclaimed a Legacy." Cameras clicked quietly in the background, but Maya wasn't interested in flashing lights. She was more focused on her tea cooling on the table and the notebook in the reporter's lap. "If you could go back to that day," the journalist asked, "the moment with the coffee, the man, the manager, would you do anything differently?" Maya didn't hesitate. "Absolutely nothing," she said, because everything that seemed to fall apart that day was actually falling into place. She paused, letting her words rest between them like a truth too long unsaid. Sometimes you have to lose your footing to remember where you stand. That night, alone in the quiet of her apartment, Maya sat by the window and replayed the memory that started it all. The feel of a $5 bill, warm from her apron pocket. The old man's trembling hands, Christopher's disdain curling through the room like smoke. She hadn't known who that man was or what would come of it. But she'd known enough to act. Enough to choose dignity over silence. "It wasn't coffee," she murmured to herself. "It was proof. Proof that a stranger's worth doesn't sit in their wallet, and that even a small gesture, when done with conviction, can echo like thunder." "It wasn't about caffeine," she whispered, almost smiling. "It was about remembering that we still recognize each other's humanity. Or at least, we should." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves like applause, and inside Maya sat still, full not of pride, but of purpose. The opening night of the cafe's first public exhibition drew a full house. The walls were lined with enlarged photographs, original blueprints, and restored signage from 1932. At the center stood the image that had anchored the entire project. Thomas Johnson, arms folded, proud and resolute in front of the original cafe door. Richard Reed stood near the back of the room, uncomfortable in a suit that seemed to fit tighter than usual, trying to look like part of the crowd but carrying a weight everyone else had long since handed off. Maya saw him. She walked over, deliberate but not aggressive. "Mr. Reed?" she said calmly. He turned, startled, his mouth forming a line that couldn't decide whether to apologize or defend. "Miss Johnson." He nodded stiffly. She looked him square in the eyes. "You know," she said, voice even, "I could have taken your family to court. I had the documents, I had the names, but I didn't." He swallowed, silent. "Because this was never about revenge," she said. "It was about truth. And truth doesn't expire. It just waits for someone brave enough to bring it to the surface." Later, after the crowd had thinned and the cameras were packed away, Maya stood in the back of the cafe once more. No apron, no badge, just her, Edward Thornton, and the quiet hum of a place, returned to itself. "Do you regret any of it?" he asked. She looked around, eyes lingering on a table of teenagers laughing over iced lattes, on Zoe talking with two older women about the next community workshop. "No," she said, "because I understand now that kindness isn't weakness." She turned to him, her voice clear and full. "It's the courage to keep your humanity intact in a world constantly trying to steal it from you." Thornton nodded, his expression warm but serious. "Then I think you're exactly where you were always meant to be." And Maya smiled, not because the fight was over, but because she had turned a single act of compassion into a movement carved from steel. The world hadn't made her bitter. It had made her brave. And bravery, like kindness, doesn't need a stage. It just needs a moment. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts.